I would now call the next presenter, Matthew Green, Councillor, Ward 3, City of Hamilton.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and standing committee members. I've traveled here to...
Could you need to identify yourself for the purposes of Hansard, please.
Thank you very much. I thought I'd heard my name. My name is Matthew Green, the very proud Ward 3 City Councillor from the City of Hamilton. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and standing committee members. I've traveled here today from the City of Hamilton to provide a testimony, not as an expert economist, although I'm sure you've probably heard from them already here today, but instead as the proud City Councillor of Ward 3, elected to represent the tens and thousands of my residents in my community who could not have the privilege to speak before you this afternoon. I'm grateful to having been provided the opportunity to share with you their stories and the stories of the 30,000 working poor who struggle despite all the long hours and hard work to survive at the end of each month, and to those who are stuck in the perils of a wholly inadequate social assistance rate, which has been stagnated for 15 years despite the rise of prosperity in an increasingly concentrated segment of Ontario's corporate class. It should be noted that as an entrepreneur owning a small business for a decade, my interest in this topic of fair wage spans years back when I joined Tom Cooper, who is here today, and the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction in their call to make Hamilton a living wage economy. It should also be noted that at that time, 5 years ago, Hamilton recognized $14.85 as determined as the minimal rate for which residents could cover their basic necessities of life or retaining a little bit left to engage in the local economy. Today, that rate is calculated at $15.85 in Hamilton and as high as $18.62 here in Toronto. So in understanding this reality, and the current proposed minimum wage capped at $15 an hour, the fair wages as outlined in Bill 142 are literally the least that you can do when thinking and voting on behalf of your working class constituents. And as this directly relates to the residents and the residents across my city, as you may have read in Toronto Life or the New York Times, our city is undergoing a massive renaissance. Yet, despite this, so many are being left behind. As a corporation, we boast about our diversified economy, which in many ways has been built, at least in part, on the backs of temporary agency service workers and migrant farm workers. Workers for which the notion of equal pay for equal work ought to be considered a simple form of natural justice. And with all this economic uplift and the real estate boom, this has resulted in a hyperinflation and a hypergentrification that has seen a once affordable rent in our city skyrocket 16 to 20% within the last 3 or 4 years alone. So I often say that my ward is to Hamilton what Hamilton is to the rest of the country. And right now in my office, we are receiving calls, witnessing daily the struggle of working class families stuck in making choices between paying rent and putting food on their table or keeping the lights on in the heat in the winter due to the soaring costs of hydro. So in this free-for-all housing market, we've essentially commodified society's necessities of life. We have commodified people's very existence for which, even if working 2 to 3 part-time jobs at 40 hours in a week, they and their families could not survive. All I say to you is this: this is not a partisan issue. This is not a left or right issue. This is an issue of fairness and better jobs for all Ontarians. Thank you.
Thank you. This round of questioning will begin with the NDP MPP Forster.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matthew, for being here. And we had one of your Hamilton bakeries here this morning, the Cake and Loaf Bakery, telling her fantastic story. So how many businesses do you actually now have in Hamilton doing kind of the living wage?
Well, when I started as a small business owner in 2012, it was a relatively new concept of providing a dignified and an ethically based business plan in my community. Currently, there are dozens that are signing on and many who are already affording a living wage. The pushback that we typically receive in Hamilton is actually from the larger corporations, the franchises, the Walmarts of the world, if you will, who are hoarding record profits while at the same time having a system set up based on the backs of their workers who are working but can't seem to make ends meet at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm. And we've heard a lot actually from associations or kind of representing business about this compression factor, about, well, if I'm going to raise the minimum wage by $3.60. Well, I'm going to have to give that same 32% increase to the guy or the gal making $20 or $22 an hour. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I heard comments earlier about the loss potentially of billions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. I would submit here today, Madam, that I am from the city of Hamilton. We've already seen that. The system as it is not working for our steel workers and for the other industries that have left due to free trade and other complex international deals. The ones that are remaining, though, are in a place of precarity where, you know, in the 60s and 70s, there's generations who could graduate high school and walk down the street and have their pick of really great paying union jobs or jobs that would be able to sustain them and their families for the rest of their lives. That is not the case now. We are seeing a precarious generation of workers who are highly skilled, highly educated, and highly in debt, facing a bleak workforce. And so this idea of having, you know, multiple layers of wages for students, young people, and in the low-income sectors like food service, for instance, what I see in my communities, the folks that are working in your Tim Hortons and your McDonald's are increasingly and growingly seniors. We're working well into their late 60s and early 70s, and they're not doing it to just get out of the house. They're doing it to survive because their pensions or perhaps their assets aren't carrying them through into retirement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll move to the government now. MPP Potts.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for being here and bringing this very eloquent defense of why it is we are doing what we are. I'm very impressed with your words here today and appreciate very much. Particularly, I want to thank you for the work you did in the living wage economy and recognizing this so many years ago. I've only been elected for 3 years here, but was paying living wages in the businesses that I started before I got into this thing, but not as part of a movement, but in order to attract really good people. But what I wanted to talk, you know, we've seen in the province of Ontario, as you talk about people being left behind, that we're seeing this fantastic growth in opportunity, but people are being left behind because we're receiving a minimum wage, which was supposed to be an entry-level wage that you would then move up fairly quickly as you got experience in the workplace and you'd be paid higher, but it's now become a base rate.
That's right.
And to be able to take that base rate, so people, as we spoke, and the previous speaker was talking about, you know, in their late time of their life, they shouldn't be making entry-level wages. They should be making good living wages. So thank you for the work you've done on that. Is your city council also 100% behind us politically saying what we're doing?
So as many municipalities, and I heard it referenced with the hybrid firefighting departments, they're facing the complexities of the tax burden and the levy dollars that they are able to raise at the end of the day to pay the bills as a municipality. So the concerns that we had were for the bottom line jumps in some of our most precarious workers. I didn't share that concern. In fact, I very narrowly lost a motion to support a living wage last year. And I'm proud to note that this year, revisiting the conversation, the complexities of the topic, and understanding what was at stake in our local economy, our city council, not unanimously, 10-5, I believe, supported Bill 148. And again, it's not just about the wages, it's about creating fairness in the workplace, and it's about the precarity that people are facing. We've heard today here from Labor that most of their workers, and you're quite right, are already receiving this. But they recognize the folks that are being left behind. You know, the folks that I passed coming in here today that are in your 10 cities, that are under the bridges, that are in our communities, that are living in tents, that are being squeezed out of these real estate markets, is becoming increasingly dire for many Ontarians.
And you mentioned I think it was 1585.
That's correct.
I'd be interested in how you're making the calculations, particularly as applies them in downtown Toronto.
Sure.
I mean, 1862, and I'd be interested, so maybe you could share with me later, or talk to how you make that calculation.
Oh, yeah, happy to speak to it. Thank you for the question. It is a very basic calculation, not needing an economics degree to understand all of your incoming costs associated with your rent, your hydro, your food, and then also understanding that at the end of the month, there needs to be a little bit of discretionary income to then pump back into the local economy. We know that when workers make more money, particularly at what you call the base rate, I would call the basement rate, that money goes directly back into the economy. And yet, when we put it through, whether it's corporate tax cuts or whether it's through stagnating wages.
Thank you. We'll now move to the official opposition, MPP Yakubuski.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Matthew, for joining us today. When were you first elected in Hamilton?
October 27th, 2014.
2014, so you're in your first term. Sounds like you're making an impact at City Council.
Thank you.
If I may ask, what kind of business are you in?
I owned a fitness company. You couldn't tell now. I've gained some weight since then, but I did own a fitness company. I had 2 locations, one in Hamilton, and for about 8 years, one in the Six Nations territory.
Politics is tough in the
Very
fitness
tough.
business, I can tell you that myself. You've touched on a lot of things about, the, 15 in fairness and paying a living wage and all this, and a lot to digest in a few minutes, but are you familiar who Mark Wafer is?
I'm not.
Mark Wafer is an award-winning employer, owned a number of Tim Hortons, and became absolutely the poster boy, if you want to call it that, for hiring those with disabilities. He spoke before our committee when we were here on first reading, and he talked about how that vulnerable sector is going to be the one to lose jobs first. This was not some organization. This was not fear-mongering. This was a guy who's won awards for the way he's treated these people, and he said they're going to be the ones that are hurt first because of the accelerated speed of this. I mean, this was never talked about in the Workplaces Review. This came up suddenly on the 1st of June when they tabled the bill. Do you have a response to what Mr. Wafer has said?
I do. Thank you for the question. You'll be interested to know that the first Tim Hortons is located in my ward. You'll also be interested to know that I'd be absolutely ashamed to hear anybody from any business politicize people with disabilities in that way, to suggest that somehow this bill, if they're not worth fairness, and they're not worth equal pay for equal work, regardless of whether they're able-bodied or disabled or whatever the situation may be, that's on that particular entrepreneur. But I don't have any sympathy for anybody who would politicize people with disabilities in that way. And I would suggest that if they were good enough to hire last year, they're good enough to hire this year at $11 or at $15. And if that gentleman has a business model that is predatory in that nature, that views these people living with disabilities in a second-class nature, perhaps he shouldn't be in business. It's not ethical and it's not moral, sir.
Well, he's hired over 250 people with disabilities.
Then I look forward to him keeping those jobs.
Yeah. And what he said was, it's not about a question of what you want to see, it's the reality of the marketplace and what this will do to the pricing of your product and the customer coming through the door. He's looking at it from the point of view of first of all, to be fair to Mr. Wafer, he never said he'd lay anybody.
Thank you very
He
much.
spoke about
We'll
what
now
happened
move
in
to
the
the third party, MPP Forster.
You want to give me another round, eh?
Oh, sorry.
I can go again, or I can answer
sorry,
that
sorry.
question. Because
That's it.
Tim Hortons is
That's
now
it.
owned by a massive Brazilian corporation that is worth gazillions of dollars. So I have no.
Sir, thank you very much. If you would like to, excuse me, order, please. This is an extension of the legislature, and so that kind of clapping, anything like that, is not acceptable. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. If you have a written submission, you can have it to the clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, November 3rd. Thank you.
Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.